Hello there, and welcome to another of Andre's Artist Profiles. Today is the 63rd birthday of Tom Petty. He's from Gainesville, Florida. Now, his first two albums with the Heartbreakers came out in 1976 and 78. And, although I primarily grew up on jazz and funk and soul and 80s dance, new wave, or whatever, Tom Petty music was always there. I just wasn't always sure who it was. And, of course, years later, when I listened to his greatest hits on a cassette, I know these songs. I listened to the Traveling Wilburys. And, with people like George Harrison, Jeff Lynne, Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, and Tom Petty all together, you start to realize why Tom Petty was there. He's an absolutely tremendous, songwriter and musician, actually, and a very distinctive vocalist at that. So anyway, the earliest Tom Petty album I have is probably his big breakthrough from 1979. It's called Damn the Torpedoes. And he had a big hit off that called Don't Do Me Like That. It was sort of his breakthrough. His first two albums were okay, and in this country, did better in England. Obviously. That's probably why he hooked up with all the English musicians and Roy Orbison, who was from America, and Wilburys later. But anyway, this is a great album. There's the Heartbreakers on the back and Tom on the front. His next album with the Heartbreakers was called Hard Promises. And the hit on that was The Waiting. The Waiting is the hardest part. It's been in a lot of TV shows and stuff. But it's a great song. A great follow-up hit to Don't Do Me Like That. And this is a very similarly themed album from 1981. One of Tom Petty's classics. His next album came out in 1982, Long After Dark. Now, this record with the Heartbreakers started to introduce synthesizers to the mix. But if you're electrophobic and you don't like synthesizers in your music, personally, I think it goes right along with the disco-phobes of the world. You may not like this album. But even so, I suggest you give it a try. The songwriting's still there. He can be contemporary, he can be futurist, but he's still Tom Petty. And this album is, I think, really underrated. Actually, a few big hits on it. The next album was called Southern Accents. This came out in 1985. This was a very slick production with a lot of modern guests on it. I don't think a lot of Tom Petty fans like this album for that reason. But it really brings out his songwriting. I found that, sleek, impeccable playing of that era really brought out people's playing. Now, people may have other ideas, mostly because of critics, I'm sure, of that time. They tend to influence people more than they should. But this is really a great album. Actually, one of my favorite Tom Petty ones out there, I'll be totally honest with you. Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics helped out on this. So did Robbie Robinson in terms of production. Now, this album, Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, came out in 1987. Now, this album had some synthesizer elements as well, but was somewhat more in keeping with the Traveling Wilbury sound, which was being introduced right around that time. So, this album was a little more back to basics sort of thing, the Heartbreakers. Now, the next thing I've got here is Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, soundtrack for the film She's the One. I believe this came out in 1996. Let me look. Yep, 1996. The price tag's actually still on it. I haven't actually removed that. This was recommended to me by my dad, so I got it. Haven't listened to it yet. Heard some okay things about it. This is another Tom Petty solo album. I have his big one, Full Moon Fever, but it came out of a record store grab bag, and I don't have a proper case for it. But this is the next solo album, Wildflowers, from 1994. So that's what I've got so far for Tom Petty and Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Aside from Full Moon Fever, and the only reason that's not included here, that's the 1989 album. It was a huge breakthrough for him because it had the song Free Fallin' on it, is because it doesn't have a proper case. But those are all the Tom Petty albums that I have. So, happy birthday to you, Tom Petty.